hopefully everything's working. Ah, there it is. Okay, so that's working. Okay, and then that's working. Good. Okay. Hello again. Welcome back to the stream. If you have not noticed, this is a Bible study. Today I wish to cover maybe not the whole thing, but hopefully a good portion of Matthew 24 and kind of go over some of the context surrounding the chapter, because this is one of the most misunderstood chapters in the entire Bible with regards to modern theology. I wanted to go over this because it deals with what we spoke about last week regarding the doctrine of the rapture. It deals with things there pretty heavily. So that's kind of why I wanted to look at this in a little bit more of a relaxed setting. By the way, if anyone was asking questions during the sermon, yes, I saw them. I did not answer them because it was a sermon. I have certain things that I need to get through to get the entirety of that sermon delivered. And also YouTube YouTube and Twitch, are not the best places to have that kind of discussion. It's just not, unfortunately. So, future reference, if you have questions, I might answer them during these periods during Bible study, but it probably won't happen during a sermon. So I'm just putting that out there. Also, I apologize for being late with the sermon this week. I'll try to get on schedule. It's really, really hectic right now with my schedule the way that it is, because I've got my secular job, and then I also have I'm preaching part-time at local congregations, and so not only do I have to get something prepared for here, I also have to get something prepared for the congregations that I go out and I preach at. So please be patient with me. I try to be patient with you guys, so I ask that you would be patient with me as well. So, Matthew 24, what is it about? Some claim that this is about the end of the world. That simply is not true. We will hopefully get into that in a moment. I just want to really make that absolutely clear that this is not, while it has apocalyptic language to it, it's not talking about the end of the world. Okay, at least not in large part. Most of it is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem that happened in 70 A.D. We know this for a few reasons, but before we get into that, we actually need to go back a little bit and look at a little bit of the context, because a lot of people don't realize what's happening in context here. And so, starting with Matthew 21, it is very, very brief, okay? Very brief context to get us caught up to Matthew 24. Starting with Matthew 21, that is 21 verses 1 through 11. That talks about Christ's entry into Jerusalem, his triumphal entry, if you will. That is a fulfillment of Zechariah chapter 9, verses 9 through 10. And so that's the triumphal entry in Matthew 21. Jesus then enters the temple in Matthew 21, verses 12 through 17. Talks about out of the mouths of babes. Out of the mouths of babes comes perfect praise. That's more prophecy that is fulfilled. Psalm 8, verse 2. He then leaves the temple. Second day then comes around, and this is where people get a bit confused because it talks about the temple. He leaves for the day, and then he comes back for a second day, and they don't realize that that's 2 days. And I'm skipping over a bunch of context here, okay? Just understand where he's at. That's kind of what I want to get across, is that he's in the temple. Okay, he's talking to the Jewish leaders. He's talking to the Jewish people. Okay, that's what's happening. Let's see here. Matthew 21, verse 23 to 24, 1. That's the second day when he goes back into the temple for the second day. And then 21:33 to 21:44. It's the parable of the winepress. It explains the Jews murdering the prophets in the Old Testament and their eventual rejection and killing of Christ. So that's all. All of that happens in the temple. Okay, again, we're in the temple. Matthew 22:1 to 22:14. That's the parable of the marriage feast. Talks about the servants who were called to the marriage feast and who were not ready. So the king killed them and went out, found others who were willing to come. That parallels Matthew 21:33 to 21:44. So we've got a parallel there. That is actually a reference to the Gentiles coming in, because the Jews rejected Christ, and so he went out to the highways and found others that were willing. So that's the talking about the Gentiles coming into the church. Let's see here. Then we get to Matthew 23. Again, we're skipping over some context. We're not looking at these. I'm just trying to get y'all caught up historically with where we're at. Matthew 23 is where things start to get really interesting. Okay? Matthew 23 starts with Jesus warning the multitudes and his disciples about being like the Pharisees. Verse 11 and 12 out of Matthew 23 exemplify this. It reads, "But he who is greatest among you shall be your servant, and whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." Of course, we see multiple times throughout just this gospel account, just out of Matthew, we see many times when the Pharisees oftentimes would prop themselves up and make themselves look great. And they would say, "Oh, look at how awesome we are." Well, Jesus then says, "No, whoever exalts himself will be humbled," Pharisees, "and he who humbles himself will be exalted," those that the Pharisees were essentially trying to put down and say, "Oh, look at how great we are, and we can keep the law, and blah, blah, blah." No, you can't. It's not possible to keep the law. Ugh. So, Jesus talks about that. Again, that's just warning the multitudes about being like the Pharisees. And then this is when Jesus really starts heavily rebuking the Pharisees with quotes such as verse 27 and 28. And you can read this for yourself. I mean, he really tears into the Pharisees. Verse 27, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanliness. Even so, you also outwardly appear righteous to men, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. So, he's very clearly not happy with them. He's been dealing with them throughout his ministry so many times. He has told them different things, told them they needed to repent, told them, no, your understanding of the law is not right. Stop it. You need to believe in me. I am the Messiah. And he says it so many different ways, and they never pick up on it. Eventually, of course, that leads to Christ being crucified. But again, they really did not like this. They really, really did not like this because he's calling them out at this point. I mean, again, read it for yourself. It's a great, great chapter. Matthew 23. Let's see. So verses 33 to 36. I want to focus on this because this is important for Matthew 24. Not only do we have the context, but we need to see what verse 33 to 36 has to say. So again, he's rebuking the Pharisees, and he says, "Serpents, brood of vipers, how can you escape the condemnation of hell? Therefore, indeed, I send you prophets, wise men, and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Assuredly, I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation." So he says these things that he just mentioned, that's going to come on that generation. Not this generation, not my generation and your generation, but his generation, their generation. That generation. That's important. Okay, because that's not talking about us. It's not talking about modern day things coming on us. That's talking about things coming onto that generation. Okay? Unless there's a 2,000-year-old person walking around, that's already came to pass. Okay? Based on that. Based on upon this generation. So, now we can get, finally, all that context. Now we can get into Matthew 24. Looking at Matthew 24. Starting in verse 1, it says, "Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple." So again, more context. He was in the temple, now he's leaving. And his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." So essentially the disciples and Jesus, they go out, and his disciples came to show him the buildings of the temple, and they're, "Oh, look at how great these are. Look at this great craftsmanship." Well, Jesus just told them something. You see all these things? It's all going to get torn down. This temple is going to be done away with. That temple. That time. That's going to be done away with. So now, we should ask, was that temple done away with? If so, when? The answer to that is yes. And he will go into more detail about that here in a moment. But he tells them, yes, this is going to go away. And that happened in 70 AD at the when Rome ransacked Jerusalem. They were tired of dealing with the Jews, so they ransacked the city and destroyed the temple. And so, with that in mind, he says this, and the disciples don't understand. You have to understand that's the center of worship. The temple is it. There's not anything that is more important, as religiously at least, than the temple. Okay, that is the whole center of their worship. That's where they have their sacrifices. It's where they go in. They have their incense, so on and so forth. If you're more interested in that, I would highly encourage you to read Leviticus, because Leviticus has all of the different offerings and the laws that actually concern that. At the time, they had the tabernacle, and the temple eventually replaced that, right? Solomon built the house of God, which did get destroyed. So this temple is the temple of that Herod built. So keep all of that in mind, because now, as we move into verse 3, it says, "Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming, and of the end of the age?'" Now, a lot of people completely miss this. There's 3 questions. The disciples asked and said, "When will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming, and of the end of the age?" They're wrapping all of that up, lump sum, as one event. That's what they're thinking. They're thinking that Christ's coming and the destruction of the temple and of the end of the age, all of that they think will happen all at the same time. It's not the case. And we know that based on context. So going on into verse 4, "And Jesus answered and said to them, 'Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows.'" When we look at these verses, I want you to notice the signs. It's very, very clear. He's telling them, okay, take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. Okay? That's a sign. "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows." That is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. So right now, what he is talking about, their first question is, tell us, when will these things be? What did he just say? He said, "Do you not see all these things?" Going back to verse 2, "Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." So they asked about that, and so he is answering that. When the temple's destroyed, these things will come to pass. Okay? And if you look at this historically, you can actually find all this. It's really interesting. "Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many, and because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come." Well, we know that the gospel was preached to the ends of the earth before 70 AD. Based on what Paul says, he wrote that the gospel has gone out to the ends of the earth. and he says past tense. So, again, a little bit of further context there. That's Colossians 1. Hang on, let me get there. Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. Colossians 1:23. If indeed you continue in the faith, grounded and steadfast, and are not moved away from the hope of the gospel which you heard, which was preached to every creature under heaven, of which I, Paul, became a minister. So the gospel at that point had gone out to all the world. So he's referencing. Reference to 70 AD. Verse 15, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place. Whoever reads, let him understand. This verse is problematic. Okay? Because many think that this abomination of desolation is talking about the Antichrist, or what is known as the Antichrist. Okay, the popular pop culture version of the Antichrist. Okay? This is talking about Rome. This is also a reference back to Daniel the prophet. And so when you cross-reference this with Daniel, we then can find out Daniel was not talking about the end of the world. He is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem there when he talks about the abomination of desolation. Okay? And that is Rome. And again, you can do historical research regarding this. Where are we at here? Luke 21 verse 20 also tells us about this, the abomination of desolation. Let's go over there because you do got to cross-reference things. Luke 21. Hang on, where's it at? 21. Nope, that's 20. I need 21. In verse 20. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. So that's very clear connection there. So the desolation, the abomination of desolation is armies surrounding Jerusalem. That army, again, historically speaking, is the Roman army. That's the Romans ransacking the city. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world, until this time, no, nor ever shall be. Unless those days were shortened, no flesh will be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. So looking at this bit of that bit of Scripture, Jesus very clearly tells them to flee as quick as possible, not even take anything with them, essentially. Like, get out of the city when you see these things happening. Get. Okay? Again, there's signs. The woes, don't know if that's in this version, 'cause I'm using the New King James when I put these notes together, I did that in the King James Version. Yeah, but woe to those who are pregnant. Woe is, that means a great sorrow or distress, or there will be great sorrow or distress to those who are pregnant. There's again that's verse 18. You can go backwards into verse 16, I believe. No, I'm sorry. That's just that's just verse 18. So that's the woes, the great sorrows, or distress. That's what he's talking about in context. He says there shall be great tribulation because of the Roman army bearing down on Jerusalem. So, I mean, pretty cut and dry. But again, notice that there's very clear signs. Okay, notice he's giving clear, visible signs. Okay, there's not any mention of a sudden appearing with no forewarning or knowledge or anything like that. Verse 23 to 25, that if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, look, he is in the desert, do not go out, or look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also be the coming of the Son of Man be. For where the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. And looking at this, again, more signs, false Christs, false prophets, and he tells them that's not how that's going to be. It's going to be as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. That is not talking about, again, in context, this is still talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. It is not talking about the second coming. Verse 28, for wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. This is interesting because the carcass, that is Jerusalem. And the eagles being gathered together, that is Rome. That's an allusion to Rome. Rome had the insignia of an eagle, so that's why he uses that there. You get verse 29 to 31. I do want to take a moment and look at these verses specifically. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Some people misuse this, and they say that this is a reference to the rapture. Okay? When asked, this is where they go. And then they use the rest of this to talk about the end times. See, there's going to be wars, there's going to be pestilence, and there's going to be this, there's going to be that, so on and so forth. Well, contextually, look at verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days. What days? The days he was just talking about. The destruction of Jerusalem. Immediately, so not 50 years afterwards, no. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. More prophecy from Daniel, so again, that's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, not the end of the world. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Again, contextually, that's still talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. There's your rapture verse, supposedly. But notice, it says, he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Heaven, not earth. So, that cannot be the rapture as it is commonly taught. Both contextually it can't be, and based on that verse, because when you look at what Matthew 24 says, right there, gathering from heaven is not gathering from earth. The two are not equal. That doesn't equate. And it doesn't make sense either. Okay? So, that cannot be the raptures people would talk about. And again, in context, this is still talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. So if it is, then the rapture already happened. Just contextually. Because of verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days. That's what the context tells us. Continuing on, hopefully that makes sense. If you don't understand, then please join the Discord. More than happy to talk with you there. It says, now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, you know that it is near at the doors. Signs. He's saying, when you see these things, this is going to happen. The destruction of Jerusalem, the tearing down, one stone not left on another, that's when this is going to happen. Okay? The age, go back and make sure I'm using the right word. That's the sign of his coming in this context, and it is the destruction of Jerusalem. Okay? That's what that's talking about. Verse 34 and 35, assuredly I say to you, this generation, that generation, not this generation, that generation, will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. So when we look at this, he literally says, this generation. And unless there is a 2,000-year-old apostle walking around, because that is who he is talking to here, unless there is a 2,000-year-old apostle walking around today, this has come to pass. It's done. And there's not a 2,000-year-old apostle walking around. Okay? No one from that generation is still alive. At least not on this earth. Might be alive in heaven for those that obeyed the gospel. But they're not alive today. And they would see these things come to pass. They would physically see them. And again, you can do a historical look at the destruction of Jerusalem, and it fits. I mean, it fits far too well for it to be talking about anything else. So, for people that want to perpetuate the doctrine of the rapture, for those who want to perpetuate this being the end of the world, no. Contextually, that is not what this says. And I get it. Okay, I'm not trying to diss anyone or make anyone upset or angry. But please understand, this has to be talking in context about the destruction of Jerusalem. It cannot be talking about anything else. It is just that is what context simply says. So please keep that in mind as you're reading. Now, however, we can look to verse 36. Because remember, there's 3 questions. He's answered the first 2 now. If we go back to chapter 24 and verse 3, the disciples ask, tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming? And what is the sign of the end of the age? Okay? 3 questions. Verse 36 is where the second coming starts. Okay? It says, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. He's just going to show up. No signs, no miracles, nothing out of the ordinary. It's going to literally be an ordinary day. And then it's going to be, all right, I'm here. That's why it's so urgent to get people saved. This is why we are to go out and preach the gospel. This is why we need to go and get as many people saved as possible. Referencing the sermon I did earlier today, they're not going to be saved if they don't hear, and it is our job, the church's job, to go out and preach. Okay? They will not be saved if they do not hear the gospel, based on Romans chapter 10. Okay? Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. It's just that's what it says. I'm not adding anything. So I do want to point something out, because some people, again, reference this as the rapture. Not the rapture. Contextually, this cannot be the rapture as described. The way that they do it is they look at verse 40 to 42 or 41. One of the two. They either stop at they use 40 and 41, or 40, 41, and 42. It says, then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. They then, notice, I ripped that out of context. Okay? We're going to look at the context in a minute. But a lot of people will use that straight out of context and say, okay, this is talking about the rapture because one will be taken and the other will be left. So those that will be taken are those that are righteous. Okay, we're taken. So you need to be ready to be taken. And it makes sense when you describe it in that fashion out of context. Verse 41, 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken, the other left. So again, that's rapture theology. And watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. See, we don't know when the rapture is going to be, but is that what that's actually saying in context? Absolutely not. Okay? Looking back to verse 36. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Notice verse 37. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. So he just made a comparison. He said, to break this down, he said, the coming of the Son of Man, my coming, is going to be the same as the days of Noah. Verse 38, for as the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark. So they were going about their normal day. And if you remember, Noah had been preaching to them for a very long time. He had been telling them, there's going to be a flood, you need to get right with God. There's going to be a flood, you need to get right with God. There's going to be a flood, you need to get right with God. Nobody listened, save him and his family. So they all got wiped out. But hold on to that thought. Moving on to verse 39. And did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. What are we going to be doing? What are they going to be doing? Eating, drinking, giving in marriage. Normal day. That was par the course for a normal day for them. And so that's what Jesus is talking about. He says, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. But notice, what took them all away? Verse 39, they did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So, in context, the flood took them away. Who's the them? Referencing the flood, the unrighteous. Was Noah taken away by the flood? No. Those taken away by the flood were the unrighteous. So now, looking at context, when we look at this, it says, then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. So the taken, because he's using comparison and contrast still, he's still doing that. Still using comparison. The taken are the unrighteous. So are the unrighteous going to be raptured? Well, that doesn't make any sense. I thought we were going to be raptured and I quote someone who believes in this, partying it up with Jesus. Is that what context says, though? No. It's not what it says. Those taken are the unrighteous. They're not raptured. They're done away with. Much like those in the days of Noah were done away with through the flood. So when Jesus comes, also notice this is at the coming of the Son of Man. Not the rapture. That's second coming. So why, how can you possibly say in context that's the rapture? If you keep it in context, you can't. That's simply not possible. But finishing this out, verse 43, but know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So much you can preach on there. Be ready for Christ. That's what he's getting at. I'm going to come at an hour you do not expect. Be ready. Again, reference to no signs, which the destruction of Jerusalem has signs. The coming of the Son of Man is not. Notice that. Verse 45 to 51, and then we will finish. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his master made ruler over his household to give them food in due season? Blessed is that servant, whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing. Assuredly I say to you, that he will make him ruler over all his goods. But if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat his fellow servants, and to eat and drink with the drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, and at an hour that he is not aware of, and will cut him in two, and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Okay. When looking at this, you've got the faithful servant and the unfaithful servant. Both of them have the same master. When you look at this, this is still talking about the second coming of Christ. You've got the faithful and wise servant, who is blessed because he is doing, essentially, he's doing what he's supposed to. Okay, he's going out and he's preaching the word of God. He's being holy as Christ is holy. He is repenting of his sins and doing all the different things that he is supposed to be doing, right? He is blessed because when his master comes, that's what his master finds. The master here is Christ. Okay, because we're still talking about the second coming. He hasn't switched gears here. Still talking about his coming, and so the master is Christ. The servant should be a Christian. Okay, is a Christian. That's who that is. Notice verse 47, assuredly I say to you that he will make him ruler over all his goods. That's a big statement. So if you stay righteous, you do what you're supposed to based on what the Bible says, then you will be made master. He will make him ruler. You will be made ruler over all of Christ's goods. That's a big deal. I mean, that makes sense because we are joint heirs with Christ. Then we move on into verse 48. But if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming. Stop for a minute. But if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, that's a Christian. Or what is supposed to be a Christian, rather. That is someone who has professed Christ and is now turning away from Christ. He is falling away. Notice what happens to him. And begins to beat his fellow servants, fellow Christians, and to eat and drink with the drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him. He's not ready. And at an hour that he is not aware of, and will cut him in two, and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That is very important. There is a doctrine out there that is very prevalent. It is part of Calvinistic theology that essentially says that once you are saved, there's no way you can possibly lose salvation. Matthew chapter 24, verse 45 to 51 says otherwise. Okay? The person who beats his fellow servants, who turns away from Christ, who eats and drinks with the drunkard, he is supposed to be a servant of Christ, and he is no longer a servant of Christ. And so when Jesus comes back, he is going to then appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. And notice that last sentence, there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That is a reference to hell. So the theology that says you can never lose salvation, that is not true. Okay, you can forfeit your salvation. You could say, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And you can wholeheartedly give it back. You can walk away. It is possible, and these verses solidify that. It's very, very serious. So please do not get complacent with Christianity. Don't just think, even if you did follow all 5 steps of salvation, you were baptized for the remission of sins, and you heard, you believed, you repented, you confessed, you were baptized again for the remission of sins. Don't think that you're just good to go. You have to stay ready. And that's going to then continue onwards into chapter 25, but we do not have time to get into that. So, as a brief look at Matthew 24, you can really get into a whole lot more theology with this. Perhaps I will do a deeper dive of this at some point. But for now, that is going to be it for this video. I hope this was edifying for you. Again, if you have questions, please save them for this. I didn't get any questions this time, and that's totally fine. But please save your questions for the Bible studies. Please do not derail me as I'm preaching a sermon. And of course, the Discord is also there if anyone wants to join that and see what the Bible has to say or has any questions. That is always open. That's always an option. I'm more than happy to assist you. There's more than just me in there that is able to assist people. So if for some reason you don't want to talk with me, I can get you someone else more than happy to talk with you about whatever issue it is that you might be having or whatever question you might be having. So, with that being said, thank you all so much for your time. May the Lord bless you and keep you and bless